This presentation is brought to you by the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center. The Behavior and Mental Health Technical Assistance Center is made possible through a collaboration between the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University and the West Virginia Department of Education's Office of Special Education and Student Support. Today's presentation is titled PBIS: How to Use Acknowledgements, Rewards, and Incentives for Distance Learning. Our presenter is Alicia Zeman, coordinator for the West Virginia School-Wide PBIS project.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Just a little housekeeping on my side, too. This PowerPoint was put together by our Mountain Behavior Support Specialist, Jen Everhart. She's a little under the weather this morning, so I'm kind of pinch hitting for her. But it's wonderful information, and I'm excited to share it with you as well. This is the third webinar in our series that we're putting together to support educators and our PBIS teams during COVID-19. The first one was about creating distance learning matrices, or shifting your matrices that you have in your schools over to remote learning. The second one that we did last week was about how we can teach our parents about PBIS at home and how they can make their own routines, their own schedules, their own matrices for their home. And then today we're going to talk about how we can use acknowledgements, rewards, and incentives for distance learning. One of my favorite things that I've learned through this, and I will admit that this is a struggle, it's been a hard road for the last month or so, but I'm really impressed by how well our system, or our multi-tiered system of support, how PBIS has been able to shift over to what we're needing it to be. To me, of course, I'm a believer in this, and it's the work that I do, but it just shows how relevant the work that we do is in PBIS, because we are in the middle of this overhaul of education because we're forced to be, but we're finding ways that we can shift what we know is the core values of PBIS and shift it to meet our needs for where we're at now. So with that, we're going to talk more about acknowledgements today. Maybe there we go. Some of the things we're going to want to take away from this today is we're hoping that as we participate in this webinar that you're going to begin to get an understanding on how to acknowledge positive behavior through distance learning, how to implement rewards and incentives in conjunction with your matrix that we talked about making in past webinars, how to set boundaries and provide consequences through distance learning. And I think we talk about this just a little bit in this, and I think if you guys are still interested and we have more people participating and wanting to know more, I think that is a webinar we could really talk more about of how to set up almost like behavior flow charts for this distance learning world that we're in right now. But we're also going to walk away with some examples of acknowledgement and reward systems to use with your PBIS matrix. We do want to give credit where credit is due. Jen spent a lot of time researching for this short webinar. She pulled information from PBIS rewards. They have a couple different documents that are based on how to set up acknowledgements in distance learning, remote learning, Florida PBIS project, and the Center on PBIS. The Center on PBIS has a practice brief out that's called Creating a PBIS Behavior Teaching Matrix for Remote Instruction. That's what our first webinar was based upon. We encourage you to go to www.pbis.org. This is one of the first practice briefs that pop up when you go there. If you click on that, there's 3 or 4 of them out right now that are specifically for this unprecedented time that we're in right now. If you click on those, they're only about 8 pages. They're easy reads. Really, we're basing our work off right now. We want to start with, because when we start with anything in PBIS, we have to make sure that we're teaching the expectations. That mantra of, if you want it, you must teach it. And then we're going on to that next part today. Once you've taught it and you see it, you must acknowledge it. But we need to make sure that we're taking the time to set up the expectations, because we can't acknowledge behavior that we're wanting to see if we haven't taught that behavior to begin with. So this example comes from that practice brief that we were just talking about. This is an example from Center on PBIS, where they're talking about how can we be safe, respectful, responsible when we're entering class, when we're in distance learning, but it's teacher-led whole group instruction, one-on-one, small group activities. In the previous webinar, we talked about maybe you need to have specific columns for specific software that you have in place. Maybe that you need to have specific columns for some specific routines that the kids are going to need to be expected to do. Now, we're no distance learning, and what we're asking them to do and the environments that we're asking them to do it now is really a high on executive functioning, and they really need to be self-motivated a lot of times to be able to be successful with this current setup. So we need to be making sure that we're teaching what that looks like, and thinking about each step for them, because we're asking them to do things and organize things that a lot of the stuff we're asking them to do, we typically take care of it for them when they're in our buildings or when they're in our classrooms. So we need to be thinking about each step, and we can't be expecting them to do it until we've taught it for them. And so this is just one of those examples of how we can make a matrix for remote learning. We point this out because I'm actually going to go ahead. We have to remember that acknowledgements and feedback systems only work when they're part of the whole system. So if all we're doing is acknowledging feedback, but we haven't set up the expectations, then it's not going to work to its full advantage of what we know acknowledgements and feedback systems do for students. If we're only setting up the expectations, but we're not acknowledging, then we're not going to have the whole plate either. We need both of those parts to be able to have a successful program in place, whether we are in the building in our classrooms as we know as normal, or we're in the situation we are in now with remote learning. So to acknowledge and to reward, when we see or hear the expected behavior, what we're wanting to do is to acknowledge and reward, because that's going to increase the likelihood that that positive behavior will continue, whether we are in person or on an online platform. When we think about incentives, we're going to talk about, let's find some fun ways to motivate the students and to continue to build classroom community even when we're not face-to-face. So we're talking about different things, all with a positive spin on it, but we need to make sure that we're putting them in the right categories of how we're using them in our current situation. So what are rewards, acknowledgements, and reinforcers? I think the definitions are really important, because oftentimes we use these words interchangeably, but what we know, even when you look up the definitions from just a dictionary, which is what I did for this, this particular slide, they're very different things. Reward in itself is a thing given for recognition of one's effort or achievement. It's to make a gift to someone, to say, I really appreciate that the work that you did, here's something for you. Acknowledgements are a little bit different. That's accepting or admitting that something exists. It's recognizing that it's important and it's a quality thing that we're wanting to see, and it's expressing or displaying a gratitude or for appreciation. And then reinforcement is really what we're working with when we talk about the work that we're doing. It's the action of reinforcing or strengthening, and that's what we're trying to do when we are putting in acknowledgement systems into our PBIS world. It's the process of encouraging or establishing a belief or pattern of behavior, especially by using encouragement or reward. So we're really talking about what kind of reinforcement system can we build in so we can see the positive behavior that we want to see in place. Oftentimes when I go into schools or I'm working with beginning PBIS teams and we're just entering, we often get really stuck on this positive part of it, and some people are like, why should we reward kids for doing things that they're already doing? But I have a secret for you all. It's not just for kids. As an adult, think real quick, what was the last thing you were acknowledged for? And did it work? And would it bring you back? Now it's a little different. We all have been social distancing and we haven't been out like we typically are. But adults get acknowledged all the time. Does any of this stuff look familiar? Kohl's Cash can get me Old Navy cash. I don't have it on there, but if I have Old Navy coupons, you better believe I'm going back to Old Navy in the next couple months. So we're acknowledged all the time for actions that we do. We love when maybe we're using our Exxon Mobil and we get enough points to get a free tank of gas. And also that social media thumbs up. We do a lot of things. We get, our brains get excited when somebody likes what we posted. That's why we're always going back to look. So we know that acknowledgement, that is powerful and it's strong. It's one of the reasons why social media is so strong, is because people are getting constant feedback, and a lot of times it's positive feedback, and that keeps them going back and posting more things and finding things like, oh, that meme got a really good reaction, I'm going to post a similar one to see if that gets a really good reaction as well. So acknowledgement is powerful for everybody across the board, and we are safe to assume that it's going to work really well for our students as well. So why should we acknowledge? I really like this bulleted list, and I'm not going to read them each to you, but acknowledgements, oftentimes when we're talking about acknowledgements in the building, we're talking about, I don't know, can you hear it, thunder? I'm sorry, I got distracted. When we're talking about acknowledgements in the building, we're really talking about what we're putting in place for adult-student relationships. When we build coupon systems, when we build gotcha systems, when we build shout-out systems, what we're really doing is providing a system to remind adults to acknowledge students for behaviors that they want to see again. When we do that, we're allowing the students to show us that they've learned what we've taught them. We're allowing them to demonstrate positive social emotional skills and behaviors. We're changing our school climate and culture and shifting it to a positive relationship building kind of culture. We can actually counteract negative peer influence by doing that, because positive is so powerful that positive peer influence can be even more powerful than the negative peer influence. We're allowing kids to get feedback for how they're following those expectations that we've put in place. When we do that, what we're actually setting up is the opportunity for kids to have the likelihood that they're more likely to engage in that appropriate behavior. So if you've ever been in the hallway with a bunch of kids and they're all over the place. I taught pre-K for 12 years, so this was not abnormal in my life. You know, you have kids and you have one kid standing on their spot and you point out, hey man, I really like how Jerry's standing in a spot. That's showing us how you can be responsible and safe at school. And then all of a sudden you have 20 other kids that are now standing in line saying, hey, look at me, I'm doing it too. I'm looking at it too. That's positive peer influence. And it's also increasing the likelihood that we're going to engage in appropriate behavior. And it's also making it concrete, those behaviors that we have taught them that we're expecting of them. I love this quote. It's by Laura Riffle. And if you watch anything about positive behavior and acknowledgements, you begin to see this quote over and over. But research indicates that you can improve behavior by 80% just by pointing out what someone is doing correctly. So oftentimes when we think about acknowledgements and we think about reward systems or what we're putting in place, we get very excited and think about all these huge school stores that we might put in place, or the bouncy house party that we're going to have at the end of 9 weeks. But really the most powerful intervention that comes from having a solid reward acknowledgement system is just pointing out what they're doing correctly. That's where that mantra comes from. If you want something, you must teach it. And if you teach it and you see it, you must acknowledge it, because that's where the intervention is. So this is from Wisconsin RTI. When I was, I did an acknowledgement PowerPoint, and I added a few things this morning when I knew I was going to be stepping in for Jen, because I wanted it to be robust, and I wanted to make sure I hit on some points that I knew I had some talking points on. I watched this video, or it was a webinar, and what they talked about is that what you feed grows. So when you're feeding those expectations, when you're feeding that behavior that are meeting those expectations, and you're feeding that with positive feedback, what you're going to see is that that's what's going to grow. So belief drives practice. If we believe that we are safe, responsible, and respectful online, and we're putting that into practice and we're recognizing and acknowledging it, that's going to even drive them to be more respectful, safe, and responsible with the work that they're doing. You have to identify what you want to grow. That's why we started with the matrix. And that's why we started with the expectations, because you have to identify that first. And then when you begin to see that, you begin to provide that specific positive feedback for it. I don't have a slide for it, but I'm going to take, and we mentioned it a few more times, throughout this, this webinar, but we talk about behavior-specific praise. That is being very specific about the behavior that you're seeing that you want to see again. So let's say, I'm going to use home as an example. Let's say that Noah, he's my 8-year-old son, has finally met the expectation of putting all his socks in the hamper. I'm going to very specifically, instead of just saying good job, because he could take out anything he's done in the last half hour, that would be a good job. I'm going to be very specific with him. Noah, I really appreciate how you picked up your socks. Thanks for showing me that you're being responsible. I really appreciate you helping keeping the house picked up. Very specific. There's no guessing for him about what behavior I want to see again or what behavior that I'm praising. So we identify that expectation. We provide very specific positive feedback for it, and then from there you watch it grow. You do that enough times, Noah's going to just innately start picking up his socks when he needs to put that away. So that example, when you give a kid a compliment and you suddenly see all 20 kids doing it, that's how you can watch it grow. You've set the foundation for it to grow in, you've praised it, you've acknowledged it, and you watch it grow in that child and in others. And that's what we're talking. We can do that virtually and online as well. We're not in the business of train and hope. So what we have to really, we can't just make the matrix and put it out there and hope it works. What we have to do is make the matrix, teach it, acknowledge it, and then watch it grow from there. So these are some of the steps that you can take. What is the target behavior that I want to see disappear? So if you're coming from, I'm having this behavior, and let's think about it in this virtual world that you're living in. Maybe your kids are coming in and they're not dressed appropriately. Or maybe your kids are coming in and they're just really rude in the chat or in the ability to have conversations. So what is that target behavior that I want to see disappear? And then you think in terms of an individual. Is it an individual problem? Is it a class problem? Is it a school-wide problem? What behavior would I like to have instead? And this is really kind of in the behavior modification for it, but when we get to that last bullet, you'll see. And then you've got to plan out, how can I get from point A to point B? And what things do I need to specifically teach? I can't leave any gaps for my kids, because if I leave gaps, they're going to fill it with their own ideas, and we know that's dangerous. So what specifically do I need to teach to get from point A to point B? And then you wait to see it, you wait for it, and when you see it, you reinforce, you reinforce, you reinforce. And that's essentially how we change behavior. We change behavior by changing the environment and then acknowledging when we see behavior that we want to see. Can you use acknowledgements in virtual and classroom environments? Absolutely. You just have to be creative. I'm going to tell you, I come from a family of teachers. My mom was a teacher. I have cousins who are teachers, amazing teachers. I've never been so proud of this profession as I have been in the last month, because we're all in survival mode, just basically in our lives. Even how we get groceries has changed, where we can go, all of that has changed. And at the same time, teachers and educators have been asked to provide quality education while keeping in mind the social emotional impact this is having on our kids, and worrying about those kids that you can't get a hold of. At the same time, learning new platforms and how to use Zoom. I can't tell you, Amy and Kelly and I have had so many Zoom meetings just to practice our ability to do this. And y'all have been doing that. A lot of you turned it around in a weekend. Some of you turned it around in a week and have set up these learning environments. And there's really cool stuff coming out from you. So when I say you have to get creative, I don't think that's something that should be intimidating to any of you. You've been doing that for a month and, almost 40 days now, if not more. So yes, we can acknowledge within a virtual classroom environment, but you have to remember that you have to start with a matrix. You have to start with those foundational expectations, or else you don't have anything to acknowledge upon. You have to be able to provide behavior-specific praise. There's those words again, both verbally and in chat features, and wherever else you can add that in there. Maybe it's email, maybe it's a follow-up phone call, maybe it's you, and I'm not saying you have to do that, but like I've seen the social media stories where they, and some of your schools are doing that, where you're driving past and having parades saying, "You've got this, we're so proud of you, we miss you." There's all kinds of different ways to have opportunities to praise our kids. It just looks different than what it typically does. And really, behavior-specific praise has always been hard, and it's something that we've had to practice and made sure that we were being intentional about. And it was oftentimes, we talked about it from our PBIS world. We talk about it all the time. If you were in our Tier 2 trainings, you heard us talk about behavior-specific praise. We talk about it till we're blue in the face, but it's only something that if you're intentional about, it becomes second nature to you. So now we're asking you to do something that might not have been second nature, and we're asking you to put it into a platform that's not second nature. So it's really important to be intentional about being specific with your praise. You can also use polling software or tools to increase opportunities to respond. Whether we are in a physical classroom or whether we're in this virtual world, virtual remote learning world, we know that the more increased opportunities for response, and the more they're actively engaged, the better outcomes will be. And that is true either way. That's one of those hardcore truths that are going to exist no matter how we're teaching. If kids are engaged, if they have the opportunity to respond and they have the opportunity to make choices, we're going to have better outcomes. And that exists everywhere, all the time. One of the things that you can do, and it's the same as it is if we're in a physical classroom, it's really powerful to greet them. I imagine that there's a lot of kids out there right now not feeling seen, not because, sometimes it might be because of the environment that they're in. Maybe nobody talks to them throughout the day. Maybe they don't have the support system. Maybe being in the physical environment at school was what got them through 9 months of the year. But even in our house here, I like to think that we have a pretty good family unit, but throughout the day, I'm doing my work like I'm doing this webinar now. My husband's downstairs at his makeshift desk, and he's on and off calls. And so Noah is having on and off times where he's getting one-on-one attention. So that ability to have kids join into a Zoom meeting, or having an opportunity to send them a little chat through Schoology or whatever, to take the time to personally greet them throughout the day, will add a positive aspect to your relationship and a positive aspect to what we've got going on right now. So thinking about greeting them just like you would when you walk through the door. Greet them by name, share a positive comment, ask them how they're doing. And that little moment might be enough to get a kid through a day when they're really struggling. And I think it's so important. We know that there's a lot of science behind using a child's name. I'm going to guess that hearing it is more powerful, but even right now, just seeing their name as somebody acknowledging who they are, I bet you will light up their brains in ways that will only create positive moments for them. I was scrolling through social media earlier, and there was a school, I think it was a high school, might have been a middle school, that had assigned kids to each of the teachers. So they had a mentor within their building, and that they were checking in daily just with a, hey, how you doing? Using their name, making sure that they're okay. And that way that child knew that there was a direct adult from their school that was linked to them throughout this process. And I thought that was a really powerful way of acknowledging that we still need this connection and that we still need these relationships. We're physically apart, but we can still be connected, and we can still have those relationships across the board. So some things that we can think about when we're thinking about other ideas to acknowledge with points and comments when we're talking about how to acknowledge students in this virtual world. So I would encourage you, if you're really interested in this and you're building a PBIS program for the virtual learning, remote learning, maybe I have a lot of schools who are having PBIS meetings via Teams, or they're using Google Hangouts or different platforms. Maybe one of the things as you start to roll this out and you start to build this is thinking about what ideas where can we acknowledge kids? So ideas like if they're on time for the video lesson, if they're participating in online discussions. Of course, you've set this up, so we're expecting you, as being responsible, we're going to expect that our expectation is that you're online on time, and that you're turning your stuff in on time. Maybe that we're acknowledging whether they're completing the digital learning activities, whether they are completing assignments before deadlines, if they're participating in the challenges that you're putting out. Some schools are doing Spirit Day activities. So on Monday, everybody wears pajamas. But honestly, if you're not doing a webinar, when we not wearing pajamas right now, Tuesday, Crazy Hair Day, Wednesday, Crazy Socks, just to bring in times that we can acknowledge students across through virtual learning. So we do have to be creative and fun when we talk about what rewards and incentives we're going to put on the other side of those acknowledgements. There's some good stuff starting to come out. We're going to show you an example from Teacher Pay Teachers. One of the examples that I heard was if you use coupons in your physical environment to go ahead and scan a copy of those and be able to hand those out to your students via sending them an email, or maybe you can find it a way to send it to them through the platform that you're using. Then the challenge becomes, yeah, Alicia, that sounds great, but what are they going to do with those coupons? Well, that's where the creativity comes through. We're going to look at that Teacher Pay Teachers and make sure that she gets all the credit, but even things like maybe they can have a chance to have a teacher from the school write them snail mail. I know my son got a postcard in the mail from the school counselor 2 weeks ago, and you should have seen the smile on his face. His world was made that day because he got some snail mail. Maybe they have an opportunity to skip a Zoom session, or they have the opportunity to skip an assignment that they don't want to do. Show and tell, a meet my family video. I know I saw somebody said that they had their first Zoom meeting with their class, and what happened was a lot of their kids just started taking them through and introducing them to family members and showing them their bedrooms and different things like that. So let's use that creativity, let's use that excitement and make that a reward or incentive that can be on the other side of that. You could make sure that each child has a goal for earning coupons or earning a reward for reaching their individual goals. You can make a class goal. When we've reached 50 points, we will have a Zoom dance party. And if you can't use Zoom, I'm certain there's other platforms that you might be able to do that with. Or maybe we will find a way to do something together. I have some more ideas coming up for you. You can offer a menu of rewards just like we do within our physical environment, some big, some small. That way children can buy with points that they earn. If you've heard me speak before, I have talked about how my son in first grade would do anything to be the class DJ. And so he would hoard his coupons that were within his classroom acknowledgement system so he could be the DJ. And my son's really unique. He likes things like Phantom of the Opera, but he also likes 80s music. So I'm sure everybody really appreciated how he loved to have that job. But he could, you can do that sort of thing. I think you could even find a way for them to be a class DJ and send out their favorite song through a menu of rewards as they earn points or earn coupons as you're setting up an acknowledgement system. And you can also still do lottery style drawing in which more entries. I follow on Instagram, I just follow PBIS, and a lot of different schools and their ideas come up if they put hashtag PBIS. And there's some schools that got really quiet there for a while, as it did everywhere. It got really quiet within our TA center, got really quiet within our schools, got really, really quiet because we were all like, what do we do now? It got really quiet on that Instagram feed, but now I'm starting to see they're taking the stuff that they've always done and just shifting it over. So in the past, about once a week, maybe they would shout out to kids in different grade levels for being the most responsible or being the most respectful, that they had drawn out those names. Now they're doing it. They've just set it up in this environment where they're pulling for different reasons that they've taught, or their respectful looks different in some areas than what it does, but they're still doing that. That familiar, I can't tell you how important that familiar is for our kids right now. Just think about how much we like the familiar and how it makes us feel like we're okay in this moment. If you have a really good system set up in your school and you can find a way just to shift it over, but now maybe we're putting it out on social media, or maybe it's coming up on your class dojo stories or something like that. Those are all, I would encourage you to find a way to continue that familiar. Here's an example, and this comes with teaching with Brianna Beverly, and it was a collaboration with the Simple Classroom. These are just screenshots that you would find if you were looking up it on Teachers Pay Teachers. But this is what she puts up so you know what you're buying. But she has many examples of different ways that they can have individual awards, a point system. If you have so many points, you can do these things. Also a teacher reward guide for classroom rewards. I think that's really powerful, and unlocking classroom rewards. We want to be really careful here. This is their work of Brianna Beverly and the Simple Classroom. And you do have to go to Teachers Pay Teachers. And the last time I checked, it was $4. But this stuff is out there and people are getting creative, and I'm seeing more and more of it every day. So even just Googling PBIS rewards for distance learning, acknowledgements for distance learning, you're going to find a lot of good stuff up there. My friend Jamie Murphy was the one who actually just found that Teacher Pay Teachers. We actually had a conversation, and she was asking me if I had anything in my back pocket for switching over to acknowledgements in the virtual world. And I said, I don't, but she had actually had parents asking for examples for her. So we started thinking, and she found that example from Teacher Pay Teachers. And this is one of the ways that she switched that over to iReady Rewards. And she very specifically, this is what I'm using these rewards because I need you to get your iReady done. When you fill up your math or reading iReady cards, this means that you have, look how specific that is. This means that you have an even 10 lessons passed. So you have a 20, 30, or 40. I want you to come back to this group post, pick the reward what you want, and post it in the discussion. Now she's teaching third graders. It's very detailed. And what she did, she sent me screenshots of this is what it should look like. That's how specifically it was taught to them. And if it's something that she can share, she's going to email it through Schoology or send it to their email, and she's going to push it out to the class that way. I thought that was a really creative way of taking what somebody had started and making it work for what she needed. When we think about acknowledgements, we need to make sure that we're still thinking of a layered approach. How can we acknowledge individuals? How can we acknowledge on the classroom level? If you have team partners, how can you acknowledge on a grade level? And then is there a way we can do some school level acknowledgements? And you also need to think about frequency. It's a little harder in this environment, the remote learning environment, but are they being frequently acknowledged? Is there some intermittent surprise acknowledgements? Is there something long-term that they can work through, work towards? So we need to make sure that we're thinking about how powerful our acknowledgements are by thinking about how we're layering it across the time. Some other examples I've seen, posting ticket winners on social media, highlighting students who are working hard on social media. If you've got some students who went over and above, maybe you can find a way of sharing their work. I know in Harrison County that each school is having different opportunities to share the work that they're doing through pictures or videos. I've also was quickly looking, a lot of people are updating. If you've been using Class Dojo, they're updating their dojo points to match the current environment. So instead of maybe maybe they've added a Zern icon. So Zern is a math learning platform. So if people are completing their Zern or their Khan Academy, they're being able to get points in Dojo for that. And then they're using their Dojo points for the acknowledgement system as they always have. But they've had to adjust what those points are because it looks different where they're at now. Also, I'm just going ahead and point out, I don't know if anybody from Dodgers is on here, but they've been doing Fun Friday competitions or Fun Friday challenges. So last Friday, they challenged everybody in their county to spend the day baking or to bake something through that day. And they were encouraging the families to work on practices. And then they highlighted all those creations on their different social media platforms for Dodgers County schools. The upcoming one that they're doing is STEAM. So they're giving them ideas and asking them to create simple machines via some STEAM ideas. And the first thing they did was a read-a-thon. So they wanted pictures from all their kids reading books throughout the day, and they were highlighting those on there. And I think you could switch that. That alone is culture building. That alone is we're all in this together. We're not physically together, but we're all working on a project that's similar. I think you could find a way to switch that for that kind of school-wide goal, or that school-wide, if we reach this many dojo points or we reach this many coupons given out by our teachers by Friday, then we're all going to have this challenge that we're all going to, and then we can't wait to see your videos and sharing that with them. I like this little picture about, all right, Lisha, all this positive talk is great. All this talk about of acknowledgements, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. On the other side of great behavior is problem behavior, and we know that. So putting students, it's really tempting to, I'm going to go back. I can't imagine how challenging it is to respond to problem behavior right now. It is challenging to respond to problem behavior appropriately within our physical school environments. And that's with things like the teacher look and proximity control. And while we want you to have other things, there is the backup of being able to send a child to the office if needed, although we want you to have robust systems, that's not your first option. We're very used to responding to problem behavior in certain ways. And even in the ways that we're used to responding to problem behavior, it's still really, really challenging. And now we've taken a lot away from what we typically respond to problem behavior with. So it is tempting because we don't have anything else. We don't have an experience of a better way of dealing with problem behavior to just almost like it is within our classrooms. Just it's easier to have them leave or have them to be gone than it is to work through that problem behavior. But we have to be very careful with that, because if we start just excluding students because of problem behaviors, just like in real life, there's a good opportunity and there's a good chance that they might not come back to us. And it's going to be way harder to get that, that relationship back when we can't physically be with them to get that relationship back, and we don't have the consistency that we have within our classrooms. So when we respond to problem behavior, and this is where I think there's probably a whole nother webinar within this. No, I don't think, I know there's a whole nother webinar within this about how do we want to make sure that we have an idea of what our behavior flow chart is for problem behavior, and how can we set them up for success without having to go to exclusionary disciplinary tactics. Because at this point, even beyond grades, even beyond what we're trying to teach them, what we really need to be doing is keeping a connection with them. That way, if there is something happening in their life, that they have the ability to reach out to somebody, and that we're being able to check in. Especially, I can't even imagine our older kids, our middle schoolers and high schoolers, just to have that ability to know that they're reaching out to somebody just to connect on a daily basis. If we rely on exclusionary discipline right now, we're really going to lose that connection, which is really one of the main ways that we're trying to keep our kids safe, just because of all the barriers that we have set up. So we've got to start thinking about what are alternatives to exclusionary discipline. And this comes from that Center on PBIS brief that we talked about before. We want to make sure that if we're needing to correct behavior, that we're doing it privately via private chat message to the student. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a follow-up. Of course, they don't have to answer those things, and that's another challenge, another layer of challenge that we have in place. But what we can really rely on as alternatives is those positive measures we can put in place. So using a praise around strategy to acknowledge publicly those who are on track. Just like I mentioned in the hallway, when that one little guy was doing the right thing and I would point it out, more people would come online to be doing that expected behavior. We can do that in the virtual environment too. Then you need to be ready to praise that student once they show the expected behavior. So reminding students of incentives and rewards that you have in place or that you've created for them. If you need to use one-on-one or small group to reteach unexpected behaviors and building stronger relationships. And then there's the student and teacher game. That's kind of a class contingency game where you set up that if the kids meet these certain goals, then they're going to get so many points. They get a point for, let's say you have 20 kids in class, and you tell them that for each I ready lesson that they turn in, that they're going to get a point. So for each kid, maybe you're getting up to 20 a day or something if they're meeting their minutes. For each one that they're not, then that's a teacher point. And the challenge is for the students to get more points than the teacher. And if they get the more points, then there's an easy class contingency that's put with that, or class reward that's put with that. Some things to consider, and I think these are so important, and this really might be my favorite slide in this. We have to keep in mind that this new normal is completely abnormal. yes, we're adjusting. Some days are better than others. There's some things that we really like about this that I think when we get freedom, when we get to go back to normal, that we're going to miss some of the things that we've got going now, but nothing about this is normal. And a lot of our little kids don't have the language to tell us what part of it is really bugging them, or even they don't have the privilege of perspective and experience to even begin to understand what's happening. So they're really relying on us. One of the premises that the TA Center has always stood on is this idea that misbehavior is stress behavior. So when we talk about what behaviors that we're seeing that might not be the behaviors that we want, we have to realize that a lot of that is coming from stress behavior, that they're not having needs met. And typically when we talk about not having needs met, we're talking about like skill deficits. Absolutely. How many of us have skill deficits right now? I have a ton of skill deficits. I just told Amy Kelly yesterday, I would love for something to feel easy and normal right now. Our kids are feeling the same way. So a lot of that behavior that we might start seeing to come out is really just evidence of how stressed that they are. We also need to be providing preventative strategies, sorry about that. Even more than those students who may have already been demonstrating problem behaviors within the classroom at school, we need to be making sure that we're setting them up for success. And we have to have grace and patience right now. We're all in this together. I've said it in other webinars, I've said it online, I've said it in person. Unless you're not social distancing and unless you are in, you're a person, and as long as we're following the rules and we're doing the best that we can with what we've been giving, none of us are failing right now. And if the fact that you are attending this, we have 52 people attending this webinar, I guarantee you none of us are failing right now, and our kids aren't either. We're just all trying to get through to the next steps. What we want you each to do when you leave these webinars is kind of begin to think of a plan of action. How can you use this and teach this to your students? If you are here and you're representing your PBIS team, how can you share this with your staff? How can you begin to build shifting over your PBIS core features into this remote learning world that we're living in? How will you share this with your parents? Because if we are using what we learned in the last webinar about PBIS at home, they need to know a little bit more about acknowledgements as well, because acknowledgements need to be happening with their matrices that in schedules and routines that they've implemented in their home. So how can we make this easy for them to understand and implement within their homes? Is there a way you can make your systems have, your acknowledgement systems have a homeschool connection? If you're an administrator and you're watching this, how can you ensure that it's being used across teachers? And this is one of those things that once again, you can begin sharing on social media. As you begin ironing out a plan, you can begin to talk to them about what it looks like within your platform that you're using for schooling. I got a couple things for you. I'm going to show you where you can go to see the previous webinars. This is the third webinar of the 5 webinar series that we have planned. The next one coming up will be this Thursday, April 23rd from 11 to 12, and that's Tiffany Hendershot. She's our Eastern Panhandle Behavior Support Specialist. She has an amazing PowerPoint that's going to be about trauma-informed distance learning, supporting vulnerable students remotely during COVID-19. I'm very excited about what is coming up, and it's a very powerful PowerPoint or webinars that's going to really strengthen the series that we have in place. And then next Tuesday on April 28th, Terrell Jones is going to be presenting on self-care during the coronavirus pandemic. And that's a really powerful webinar as well, really talking about how we can support our educators, how we can support ourselves. And I will say that we can probably even think about how we can share that with our parents as well. What self-care are we putting in place to make sure that we know we can't give from an empty cup? So we've got to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so we can take care of others as well. I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to see if I can shift to my Explorer. Yeah, right here. So if you go to www.wvpbis.org, it will bring you to this homepage. This is where our training materials are for all of our academies. If you need to do your end of year TFI, hint, 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 you can go to evaluation and data and find the information for the TFI and all the documents that you would need from that. If you will scroll down to where it says media and you click on media, is it going to work? Yeah. Here is where we are putting our webinar dates. This is where our PowerPoints and the practice briefs that go with it are being posted. And then this is where our webinar recordings can be found. So this is the last webinar we had last week. We got so many requests for the PowerPoints and to see the recording because you wanted to share it with others. We wanted to put it in a location where everybody can go find it. We're also hoping that they will be posted, and they might have already been, I haven't checked yet. The WVDE has a website that is WVDE, I know it's /COVID-19 at the end, which is where you can find all the educational briefs and all the educational resources that they're putting out. There's also all kinds of resources for parents on that COVID-19 page from the State Department, and we're hoping, and they might have already been linked there as well, but we wanted to share where you can find that. There's also a couple professional developments down here if you're interested. Some of you are like, I cannot do one more thing. Some people are like, this is a great opportunity to learn more. We have a couple book studies down here on a couple of really great books. I also would like to put a little shout out. Our behavior support specialist and myself and Jim and Amy, we're doing everything we can to meet you guys where you're at. So if you are having a PBIS meeting on a platform and you would like your behavior support specialist or myself to join you, you just let us know and we will do our best to get there for you. We've also been doing some trainings via Zoom, via Microsoft Teams. So we're available if this has gotten you thinking about where you want to go next with what you're doing with PBIS.
For more information regarding the West Virginia PBIS project, you can go to www.wvpbis.org. For more information regarding the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center, you can go to www.marshall.edu/BMHTAC. For the most current information regarding the West Virginia Department of Education's response to the COVID-19 crisis, you can go to www.wvde.us/COVID-19. This site also has resources for families as well as educators.